Rachel, and today I'm bringing you all of the books I read in 2020. So first of all, you may see behind me a new little fish tank. That's because I was gifted for Christmas a little fish. His name is Fenwick. He lives on my bookcases. I'm not great at living things. I usually kill plants like in an instant, so we'll see how long poor Fenwick can survive with me. But he's back there. You can check him out as we go. He doesn't normally come out unless we're watching British Bake Off, so he's probably hiding. So, nonetheless, now that you've met Fenwick, time to get to the books. I managed to read 65 books this year, which I'm not like overly thrilled about because I normally read a lot more than that, but considering the trash fire that was 2020, we're just gonna accept it and just be happy with what we got done. So, basically I'm just gonna go just straight through the list by month and give you just a quick little tidbit of like what kind of book it is and move on. I'll be following this video up with my top 10, so you'll see the ones that are just absolutely my favorites in the next video. So, let's go. Again, I'm not going to talk too much about any of these because I don't want this video to last forever. So, first up in January, I read Dread Nation by Justine Ireland. This was a reread for my high school book club. Thoroughly enjoyed it. This is a YA alternative history set in the Civil War where the soldiers come back as zombies. And then I immediately followed it up with the sequel, Deathless Divide, also by Justine Ireland. And if you haven't read these two books, you need to. I mean, top notch. They're dark and intense, but fantastic. Then I read a little bit lighter. I read the next edition of The Bad Guys. This one's called The Baddest Day Ever. This is volume 10. This is a middle grade, elementary level graphic novel about bad animals that are trying to be good, essentially. I talk about this all the time on my channel. Love the series. And yeah, this is by Erin Blavey. Then for my peer book club, I read Little Women by Louise and Alcott. I did only read Little Women. I did not read Good Wives, which is technically the sequel that is typically considered part of Little Women. I just wasn't down for it. I had a hard enough time with this one. It just wasn't necessarily for me. I do think maybe I should try to read the whole thing at one point, but I don't know. I read Little Women and it was just okay. Next, in February, I started with Over the Top by Jonathan Venice. This is a memoir and I listened to the audio edition so I could hear all of Jonathan Venice's sassiness and it was fun. Then I read Internment by Samira Ahmed. Again, this was a reread for me. I reread this with my high school book club. This is a YA book that's really hard to classify. Essentially, it's like a near future book where the U.S. reinstates internment camps, this time for Muslims. So it feels almost like a historical fiction because it feels like you're reading a book about Japanese internment camps, but you're not. This also isn't something that has happened, so it's not contemporary. I guess speculative fiction is the best way to put it, but it feels like a contemporary book, and that's what makes it so chilling. Then I read The Silent Patient by Michalitis. I did enjoy this one. This is an adult murder mystery thriller, but I was sick when I read this, so maybe that played a part in it. And then I read a short story collection called An Elderly Lady is Up to No Good by Helen Tursten. I believe this was translated from Swedish, and this was just a cute little collection. I guess you would consider this adult mystery. Then I read The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. This was my first Ruth Ware book that I read and one of 3 this year. This is a retelling of Turn of the Screw. I always want to call it Turn of the Key. Of Turn of the Screw, and while I wasn't crazy about the ending, I overall enjoyed the experience, which I feel like that's like a theme with Ruth Ware for me, but enjoyed it nonetheless. This is an adult like mystery thriller. Then for part of a challenge, I was supposed to read a poetry collection as an audiobook, so I picked, I think these are called Women Are Magic or something series, but the princess saves herself in this one, and the witch doesn't burn in this one, and the mermaid's voice returns in this one, all by Amanda Lovelace. This one was a reread for me. That's why I decided to go through the other 2 books in the series. I think as far as poetry goes, this is probably as much as I'm gonna like a poetry series. I just don't really get into poetry, but I liked them all gradually less. So my favorite was The Princess Saves Herself, then my next favorite is The Witch, and then my last favorite was The Mermaid. And then to close out February was my peer book club pick, which was Tuesday Mooney Talks to Ghost by Kate Rakulia. And this was an adult, I guess, mystery, you'd call it, maybe adventure, I don't know. Kind of like one of those inheritance games situations where there's an inheritance on the line and everybody teams up to try to outsmart the other teams and win the inheritance. This was actually the last book that my book club got to physically meet to discuss as well. A little tidbit for you. And then in March, things slowed down a little bit because it was March. So I read Of Curses and Kisses by Sandhya Menon. This is a YA retelling of Beauty and the Beast, and I really liked it. There's more to come in this series, and I'm super excited for it because I love Sandhya Menon. And then I also read a short story collection / graphic novel called Ghost 13 Haunted Tales, and it's kind of like a graphic novel children's version of the Canterbury Tales if it was scary. They're all collected, obviously, and cohesive, and they kind of group together, and they're spooky and fun, and I really enjoyed this collection. Now moving on to April, I first read I Survived the Sinking of the Titanic by Lauren Tartus. I will say that this has probably been my least favorite of the I Survived series so far. It just seemed a little slow for me. But overall, great series. This is a middle grade historical fiction adventure series. Then I read Every Heart a Doorway by Shauna McGuire, and I absolutely fell in love with it. You're going to hear it again later because I actually ended up rereading it this year. This has everything. It's a short little tiny book, barely more than a novella. It's a portal fantasy, a murder mystery, and a coming of age tale, all wrapped into one little tiny book. Fantastic. And this is a YA / adult fantasy. You'd have to label it as fantasy, I guess. It's in our like contemporary world. It's just people can travel to different worlds. Does that make sense? So technically fantasy. You might consider it magical realism, but I think it's too much fantasy for that. Then I read I Can't Keep My Own Secrets. This is a collection of 6-word memoirs edited by Rachel Freshlizer, and this was just not for me, but I thought the topic was very interesting. The idea, the concept of these 6-word memoirs all collected together were interesting. It just didn't work for me. This is aimed at YA age range, and obviously this would be considered nonfiction since it's a collection of these memoirs. Then I reread The Little Book of Huga, Danish Secrets to Happy Living by Mike Viking. I didn't really get anything out of my reread of this book this year, but it did what I wanted it to do, which made me refocus on trying to make my life and house a little bit more Huga-esque during, quarantine and all the chaos of this year. So it helped. I would consider this adult nonfiction, kind of a new age nonfiction. And then lastly, in April, I read Book Love. This is a graphic novel by Debbie Tung, and this is essentially a graphic comic collection for people who like to read. If you like reading, this comic collection's for you. Again, probably considered like adult, technically nonfiction because it's a graphic novel, but just a comic collection. Then in May, I only read one book, but I read it really well. Look at all these tabs. I annotated and everything, and that is Lady Killers, Deadly Women Throughout History by Tori Telfer. This is just what it sounds like, a collection of female serial killers throughout history. I think it spans from the 1300s all the way to the 1950s, so it really does go quite a ways back. One thing that I thought was really interesting is kind of the tone of the book, which is like, see, look, women can be serial killers too, which is not what you'd expect in a book about serial killers, but it was very interesting. As you can see, I made several notations, and I really enjoy my reading experience of this book. Then in June, the first thing I read was I'd Rather Be Reading, The Delights and Dilemmas of the Reading Life by Bogle. This is a collection of essays about a love of reading by a person who loves to read. I would consider this adult nonfiction because it's essays. Overall, it was okay. Then I read A Good Marriage by Kimberly Mccree. This would be an adult thriller. I read this for my peer book club and I thought this was okay. Then I read Home Before Dark by Riley Sager. This is an adult thriller / horror. I read this for my peer book club and I really enjoyed this one. And then I picked up The Handmaid's Tale, the graphic novel adaptation. I don't really like this one. I don't really know why they made it into a graphic novel. I actually think the graphic novel detracted from the original work, so if I were you, I would just read the original book and just skip the graphic novel. Then I read Fangs by Sarah Anderson, also known as Sarah Scribbles, and this is a comic collection themed around a vampire girl that falls in love with a werewolf boy. Loved it. I guess technically adult nonfiction because it's a comic series. Then starting in July, I read The Bad Guy's Guide to Being Good. I felt like this was not necessary for the collection. It seemed like more of a teaser that the Scholastic Book Fair group put out just to tease the series. I mean, I enjoyed reading it, but it didn't add anything to the series so much. It didn't really move the plot forward. Then I read How to Fake a Moon Landing by Daryl Cunningham. This is a YA graphic novel, and I will say this is probably my least favorite book of the year because, again, I don't know why they made this a graphic novel. It really did not work well as a graphic novel. It wasn't formatted well for a graphic novel. The graphic novel elements didn't do anything to make the story better. And the tone of the book made it seem like, I don't know, it just didn't work as well as I'd hoped. Originally, it's supposed to be like a look at people who doubt science, which is an interesting topic this year, but the tone kind of ruined the themes, I think. So overall, I just didn't like this one much. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. Next up, I read Untamed by Glennon Doyle, and like most adult nonfiction books that are memoir / self-help. I picked up some things that I thought were helpful, left the rest. I think that's what you need to do with most of these. Find inspiration where you can and move on. Then I picked up Escape, this book. This one's Tombs of Egypt by Bill Doyle and Sarah Sachs. This is kind of like a choose your own adventure activity book. There's things to do in each one. You're reading, you're turning to different pages, you're bending, you're folding, you're lifting, you're writing. Totally fun. I would highly recommend this for kids you know. Probably, maybe even as low as 3rd grade could do it, but I think that might be stretching it. They also have a Titanic and an Outer Space edition. Then I read the first book in the Claude series, Evil Alien Warlord Cat, and this was so cute. Essentially, it's a middle grade humor fantasy story. It's about like this evil cat who is banished from his home planet that's full of cats and is sent to live on Earth as punishment, and he becomes a pet, and it's really funny. Then I read De-Evolution by Max Brooks. I really enjoyed the writing style in this one. It's an adult thriller horror, and it's written like a first-person account, which makes you really doubt reality. I checked multiple times to make sure there had not been A, an eruption in Washington State, and B, an actual Bigfoot Sasquatch attack because it was so realistic when you're reading it from this first-person account. Then I read Grass, a graphic novel that is probably appropriate for upper YA and adults about Japanese comfort women. We particularly follow one woman in her story, and it is gut-wrenching and so hard to read, but just as we learn in the story, it's important that their stories are heard and understood and remembered and not just swept under the rug. So it's hard to recommend this book because it is such a hard book, but it's an important book and it's really good. So there it is, Grass, and it's dense. It's a super thick graphic novel, and it is going to crush your heart. Then I revisited Every Heart a Doorway for a video series where I then continue to read Down Among the Sticks and Bones, Beneath the Sugar Sky, and In an Absent Dream. And I have to say, In an Absent Dream is probably my least favorite of the four, just because it's probably the one that made me the most emotional. But I also really enjoyed this one because we got to see a lot more of the world, but my favorite is still Every Heart a Doorway, just because it was my first experience into this fantastic fantasy series, and I just have all the feels for this book. I love this book. I'll probably reread it again. It's so good. If you don't know where to start with fantasy, I would highly recommend the series, because I'm not a big fan of like high fantasy. I think it's intimidating, but these are super accessible. They're very short. They're very fun, and I think this would be a good gateway into fantasy. And I absolutely cannot wait to catch up on the series in 2021. Then I read The Bad Guys by Aaron Blabey, number 11. This one's called Dawn of the Underlord. Again, middle grade comic series. Love the series. Then I read Kent State by Deborah Wiles. This is a YA historical fiction book and verse about the Kent State massacres. And then I picked up Pet by Akwaeke Amizi. This is a probably YA, I don't even know what to call it, like magical realism, fantasy. I don't know what to call this book. It was fantastic though. I've never read anything like it. I doubt I ever will. It is dark though, so just be warned that it gets real dark, real emotional. It hits pretty hard, so just be aware of that. But fantastic. I struggle to recommend this book because I know that there's so much emotion that's going to hit the reader, and I don't personally like to read books that make me very emotional, but such a good book. Fantastic writing, just wild ride. Oh my gosh, so good. Then in September, I only managed to finish one book. P.S. I did not forget August. I just didn't read anything in August, really. Technically, I started a book of short stories, which I'll mention in a minute, but I didn't finish anything in August. In September, I read One by One by Ruth Ware, and I really liked this. I know a lot of people didn't, but I thought it was fantastic. I had a really good reading experience with it. It's a closed circle murder mystery, adult, by the way, where it's in a cold setting. It just ticks all the boxes that I'm starting to realize are what I want in a closed circle murder mystery. I'm loving cold setting, locked room murder mysteries. That's what I dig. And as you'll see, several of the books I read this fall were in that. So I enjoyed it. I know a lot of people didn't, but adult murder mystery, fantastic. Then in October, I read The Night Swim by Megan Golden. This was for my peer book club. This is an adult mystery thriller that involves elements of a murder mystery podcast, if you're into that. I also read I Survived the California Wildfires by Lauren Tartus. This was interesting because it's a newer I Survived, which I've not read one that's taken place so recently. This one took place in 2018, which was interesting to share with the kids. I thought this was pretty good. Again, all the I Survived books are middle grade historical fiction / adventure. Then I finally finished that short story collection I mentioned a minute ago. It's called Don't Turn Out the Lights, edited by Jonathan Mayberry. They collected a whole bunch of middle grade and young adult authors to write scary stories in honor of Alan Schwartz's Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. And I think this was a great collection. I think the kids are really going to like it. So horror, short story collection, middle grade, and just tons of authors that you would know, including none other than R.L. Stine. And just like any short story collection, though, there's going to be some that you like, some that you don't. Overall, I thought it was pretty entertaining. And the reason it took me so long is because fall was ridiculous. Going back to work this fall was so hard and just stressful and busy that I didn't really read that much, but I was reading like a short story during lunch. I take like a 20-minute lunch break and read a short story pretty much every day when I could, and eventually I finally finished this up in October, but I liked it. I would recommend it. Then I reread In the Hall with the Knife by Diana Peterfreund. One, because I really enjoyed this book last year, and two, because I wanted to be ready for the sequel that came out later that month. And this is a YA murder mystery that is based on the Clue game. And guess what? It's a closed circle murder mystery in a cold setting, which I love. And then I picked up the OG closed circle murder mystery, which was And Then There Are None by Agatha Christie. I wasn't really sure I was going to like this. I went in with low expectations, but I ended up reading it in like 24 hours. I listened to it and it just went so fast. This is one I can see myself revisiting. I don't know if you'd consider it YA, but it is appropriate for YA and adult audiences, and obviously murder mystery genre. And then I picked up All 13, The Incredible Cave Rescue of the Thai Boys Soccer Team. This is by Christina Sonternavat. This was for a nonfiction panel I was on this fall, and it was fantastic. I don't know how you can give away the ending in the title, even if you hadn't heard about the ending on the news in real life, that all 13 kids escaped and still be such a nail biter. Sadly, one of the rescuers did not make it, but you know all the kids are gonna make it and you're still so worried about them and just biting your nails and you're sitting on the edge of your seat. It's so tense, but you're learning so much as you read through it. I mean, I just can't recommend this nonfiction pick enough. I would say this is appropriate for middle grade and up. So interesting, so fascinating, and just quite a nail biter. Then I picked up Pumpkinheads by Rainbow Rowell and Faith Erin Hicks. Is this completely over the top and ridiculous? Yes. But is it fantastic for the fall? Yes. I actually love reading this fall. It's just all the fall vibes and cheesy, ridiculous romance, and I loved it. That's all I'm going to say. YA, graphic novel, obviously contemporary. And then lastly, I read Seance Tea Party by Rimina Lee, and this is a middle grade graphic novel, kind of contemporary magical realism, I guess, a little bit of fantasy. I thought this one was okay. And then I read In the Study with the Wrench, is my first book in November. This is again by Diana Peterfreund, a Clue murder mystery, the second in the series. I think that this one wasn't quite as good as the first one, but it was still a lot of fun. And then for my nonfiction panel, I picked up Kobe Bryant, Basketball Superstar by Tammy Gagne. This is kind of a Gone Too Soon collection of people who sadly died pretty young, and since Kobe Bryant sadly passed away earlier this year, he was included in the series. I don't know how I really felt about this one, because this is not something I would normally read, but you know, there was nothing wrong with it, and I think a lot of people who are interested in Kobe Bryant and biographies, especially sports biographies, and especially basketball biographies, would like this collection. I think this would be appropriate for upper middle grade and YA, for sure, and obviously biography, nonfiction. Then I read The Silver Eyes graphic novel. This is the graphic novel adaptation of the first book in the Five Nights at Freddy's series by Scott Cawthon. And I don't think the graphic novel adaptation was fantastic, but the plot is interesting enough that I really want to read the actual books now. This is an upper middle grade series. It's allegedly based on a video game, but the kids had to tell me that because I'm not hip enough to know anymore. I'm old and I don't know things, but interesting. It's definitely violent though, so just beware if you're recommending that for your kids. Just maybe investigate a little bit and see how comfortable you are with the violence, but interesting. So it's definitely kind of a horror thriller, upper middle grade series. Then I read The Woman in Cabin 10 by Ruth Ware. This is an adult mystery thriller, probably my least favorite Ruth Ware so far. And then I read The Bad Guys in The One. This is the 12th volume of The Bad Guys by Aaron Blabey. Again, middle grade, elementary comic series that I love. Then I read The Collector by K.R. Alexander. This is a horror middle grade book. I wanted to read this author for a while because they are a popular name in the kind of horror space for middle grade, which is such a popular category right now for the kids. So I wanted to read one, and I think it did what it was supposed to. I don't think it's for adults, but I think for kids it's pretty entertaining. Kind of similarly with the next one, I read this for the nonfiction panel. This was the Lizzie Borden Axe Murders by Carla Mooney. This was part of a true crime series in YA nonfiction, and I think for that target audience, it was probably pretty good. I think if you were a teen interested in true crime and had never heard of Lizzie Borden, this would be pretty good. But being an adult who knows pretty much everything they said about Lizzie Borden, I thought it was a little redundant for me personally. So interesting book. I would recommend it for, again, teens who are interested in true crime. Then we are to December. So first up in December, I read Leave the World Behind by Rahman Alam. I would consider this like suspense horror for adults. I read this with my peer book club. I also read Beast Face to Face with the Florida Bigfoot by Watt Key. This is a middle grade adventure horror book about Bigfoot. Then I read Two Truths and a Lie. It's a live edition. I love this series. Essentially, it's what it says it is. Every chapter contains 3 kind of stories / essays, and you have to try to figure out which one they've made up. And it's just a lot of fun. This one was all about like plants and animals and things obviously that were alive, thus the title. This is middle grade nonfiction. Then for my nonfiction panel, I read Kiyo Sato's story. This was written by Connie Goldsmith with help from Kiyo herself. This is her story of being interred in the concentration camps here in the United States during World War II for Japanese Americans. This is YA nonfiction, very interesting. And then I read All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. I would highly recommend the audio where you hear the author himself relaying these stories, these essays. Again, YA nonfiction. Read this for my nonfiction panel. And then I read The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. This is an adult mystery thriller. Can you guess what it is? It's a closed circle murder mystery set in a cult setting. Although this is probably my least favorite of them that I've read this year of that kind of trope. It just didn't quite do it for me, but I did like the setup of it. That's my favorite trope for sure. And then I read I Love You More Than My Phone by Dante Fabiro. This was an advanced copy I got. The book comes out in January, and this is about Slothilda and Peanut. It's a comic collection, and it's such a hoot. If you don't follow Slothilda, you should follow Slothilda on Instagram. I'll link it down below because Slothilda is just one of my new favorites. I discovered her in 2020, and I am a better person for it. And then I read, to finalize the year, 2 Don Brown YA nonfiction graphic novels. The first one was one that comes out in 2021, In the Shadow of the Towers. It's about 9/11. The other one was Fever Year, the killer flu of 1918. Obviously about the 1918 flu. And these are just like short nonfiction graphic stories to give you information that, most kids probably wouldn't read in a regular nonfiction book. So they're entertaining for that purpose. Whew. We just went through 65 books, and I'm pretty proud of myself. So let me know down below if you read any of these before so we can chat about them. Do you agree, disagree with my thoughts? I guess I didn't give you many thoughts, which, by the way, check out my Goodreads if you want to know more about any of these books, because I couldn't talk about them much since there were 65. But what is your favorite book, more importantly, of 2020? I'd love to know down below. And as promised at the top of this video, I'll be giving you a top 10 video soon. So I'll be picking out from these my top 10 of the year and sharing that video soon. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.